Hello and welcome to chapter 12 of the Miraculous fanfiction, A Glitch in the System. This is all written and narrated by Milady Samantha. I hope you enjoy this one. They stood in an awkward silence for a few moments as Marinette began to freak out again. Oh, why had she opened her mouth? Why the heck would she tell him? And like this as well. Oh, what a disaster. An absolute disaster. Cat Noir was lost in deep thoughts. His longtime friend Marinette liked him. No, she loved him. He was remembering all his interactions with her as Hadrian, and it was becoming clearer. All this time, he had thought she was still mad with him from the day they'd met, but no, she was just acting strange around him because he was her crush. He was her ridiculously named Buttercup. Cat Noir burst out with laughter, much to Marinette's dismay.
I'm sorry, you like Fragrance Boy? Why? Because he's so dreamy.
Cat fell to the floor and was laughing hysterically.
Cat! Marinette snapped. He's so much more than just dreamy.
She muttered, not knowing Cat could still hear. A blush formed across his face, so it wasn't just a fantasized love. It was real.
Or because he's ever so radiant.
Cat said as a cat-like smirk was plastered upon his features. He just couldn't help himself.
No, Cat! This isn't a joke!
Marinette pouted angrily, and in that moment, Cat couldn't help but be reminded of his lady and how cute she looked when she was angry. He smiled fondly at the memory. Hold up. Wait, no. Marinette reminding him of a ladybug? But that's impossible, especially when he saw both Marinette and Ladybug side by side as Multi-Mouse, as she accidentally detransformed to his surprise. Cat was really curious. He wanted to know more. Was it fair to be asking about this knowing he was her crush? Marinette's face still remained ever so pouty. Cat decided to break the silence.
So, you really love him?
Cat said softly. Marinette froze. She was so afraid to admit it out loud, knowing full well who was beneath the dark costume.
Yes.
Marinette stuttered. Cat blushed as a further question escaped his lips.
You're not just into him because he's a rich and popular model?
He added, sounding a bit snarky, unintentionally of course. Marinette looked up at Cat. Did he really think that's all anyone would ever see in him? She frowned.
No, actually, when we first met, I thought he was an awful person. I didn't recognize him as the famous model. Not until my friend Alia pointed it out to me after I had gotten upset with him, Marinette said.
Cat frowned. Marinette thought he was awful that day, huh? It hurt to remember. Marinette noticed Cat's gloomy look.
But then I saw who he was. The boy he is deep down.
She added, getting more red by the word. Cat looked up. His eyes wide, his ears perked up.
Tell me the rest. Oh, please, Marinette. I'm super curious.
Cat shrieked. Marinette giggled.
Well, after school, I was about to head home, but it was raining, so I hesitated. And then Adrian came out. He explained that he wasn't the one to place the chewing gum on my seat, and explained that all he wanted to do was help. He told me that this was all new for him, and then he handed me his umbrella. And that was the moment I fell in love. The moment he showed me his true kindness,
Marinette said proudly. Kat blushed under his mask. So she fell for him the same day he'd fallen for Ladybug? What a small world. That's right. He loved Ladybug. And Marinette loved Adrian. He was sad. He wouldn't want to hurt Marinette. She was his favorite person besides Ladybug, and the only person who could understand him. He couldn't tell her anything though, because then she would know that he was Cat Noir, and Marinette mustn't know his identity, because then that would place her in a very dangerous position, and he couldn't be having his ever so dear friend in harm's way. No, if anyone was ever to harm this girl, they'd have to go through him first. Marinette was one of the first friends that Adrian had made besides Chloe and Nino. She was important to him. He couldn't hurt her. He was unsure of what to do. For the next few minutes, the two stood in silence, not knowing what to think or say. Marinette couldn't believe herself right now. She couldn't believe that she told Cat Noir how she felt about Adrian, who was actually still Adrian. What? This was all overflowing inside Marinette's head, and she was on the brink of a meltdown. She glanced over at Cat, who was mesmerized by the stars. He was staring out into the sky dreamily, thinking about what was to go down with his lady later. Marinette couldn't help but notice how handsome he was as he stood there, hair swaying in the gentle breeze and his green cat-like eyes twinkling in the moonlight. Marinette blushed furiously. She decided she'd break the silence with some conversation.
So,
She started hesitantly.
what are you doing out so late?
The raven-haired girl questioned with an awkward grin. Cat kept his gaze upon the sky.
Actually, I came out to meet with Ladybug.
He said, not caring to mask his affectionate tone. Marinette blushed. Seeing the way he was looking as he'd said her alter ego's name made butterflies swarm in her stomach. She shook her head internally, telling herself to focus.
Any particular reason?
She said. Marinette just couldn't help herself. She desperately wanted to know what Cat could say. After all, he'd questioned about her feelings for Adrian, whilst not so secretly being Adrian. Although, Cat didn't know that Marinette already knew who he was. He didn't suspect Marinette, at least it didn't look as though he did. Cat took his gaze off the beautifully starred sky and turned to face his raven-haired friend, as she was curiously peering up at him, awaiting his response. Cat frowned.
Between you and me, Ladybug seemed pretty upset today,
he stated sadly. Marinette noticed how Cat's bright expression faded into a look of hopelessness. Her mouth furrowed, eyebrows narrowed, and an upset expression was left upon her face. Could she really have caused Cat that much stress? She was upset with herself for showing him her vulnerability. He probably had enough to deal with in his own life without her adding more worries for him. She felt a watering sensation in her eyes. Marinette turned away coldly. She felt like a burden. She always toppled her problems onto other people without even thinking it through, and she did not want Cat Noir to notice her glossy eyes. She did not want to cause him any more unnecessary stress, worry, or sadness. However, Cat immediately noticed Marinette's mood change as she bluntly spun her face out of his gaze. Cat was now facing her raven hair. He noticed the all too familiar indigo highlights, which were spread throughout Marinette's black roots. Had Marinette always had blue-black hair? He'd always thought it was just black, although maybe it was dependent on the lighting as to how her hair looked. Marinette's silky raven indigo hair was shining beautifully with help from her balcony fairy lights as well as the moon. She was clutching her hand to her chest, hugging herself as she desperately fought against the tears in her eyes. Kat was confused by Marinette's change in mood and snapped out of his haze. His friend was obviously upset about something, and he needed to find out what was bothering her. Kat edged closer to Marinette's side and gently placed his gloved hand onto her cheek.
Marinette.
Kat spoke softly. Marinette's heart began to beat faster as she heard him call out to her.
Please, Marinette, turn around. You don't have to hide your feelings from me.
Kat said, almost shouting it for all of Paris to hear. Marinette was stubborn. She appreciated Kat's gestures, of course, but she didn't want him to see her in this state, not when he already had his ladybug. She believed that she'd put the boy through enough. Kat's ears drooped. He didn't have a choice. Instead, he gently caressed Marinette's chin and turned it towards him. Marinette squeaked in realization. Kat's ears drooped even lower when he immediately noticed Marinette's tear-stained eyes. Marinette frantically twisted herself back around, tears splattered from her eyes that she could no longer contain her feelings of despair.
Oh, Marinette.
Kat cooed sadly.
You don't have to hide from me. I want to do anything I can to be here for you,
he said with a stubborn attitude. Marinette still felt the water pour from her eyes. Her vision was blurred terribly. She didn't deserve Cat Noir. He was too pure for his own good. How could I have been so awful to him all those times? I rejected him, I shouted at him, I often wasn't nice when he made jokes. I told Aspic we didn't need Cat Noir, not knowing that they were the same, and I threw him in the trash. Marinette's thoughts floated around in her head. Marinette was knocked to her knees. Cat rushed to her side.
Marinette!
He exclaimed worriedly. Without another thought, Marinette whispered,
I'm so sorry.
her voice cracking as she spoke to Cat's dismay. He was confused. Why would Marinette need to be sorry?
You don't have anything to apologize for, Marinette. Everything is fine,
he assured her. Marinette threw herself into his arms. A stunned Cat Noir wrapped her into his arms and soothingly stroked her hair. Moments later, Marinette stood and walked back into her bedroom. Cat followed her to her door.
Marinette, are you going to be okay?
He asked, with the worry still glued to his face.
Yes, Cat. I have something I need to do.
She sputtered as she realized the time. She had only 5 minutes to collect herself before again meeting with Cat, but this time as Ladybug.
Okay, Marinette. Well, I have to get going now too, but I'll check up on you again soon,
he said as a small smile escaped his lips. Marinette waved goodbye and then climbed back down the ladder into her room. Thank you so much for listening to chapter 12 and 13. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I apologize if there's any noise in the background, such as a bird squawking or if you can hear someone talking. It's nearly 5 a.m. for me, but there's still people awake, around me. Which is really strange, but yeah. But I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.